Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. You are listening to part 2 of our look at Desmond's, which means if you haven't listened to part 1 yet, do go back and listen to that first. We're already halfway through an episode, but we do have plenty left to talk about, not least the writer and creator, Trix Worrell. We haven't talked about him yet, and we've got some other things to discuss. And just in case you can't quite remember what happened, we're going to start with Gareth giving us a quick update on what's happening in our episode, and we'll go straight back into it. Here we go!
Basically, Calypso he's a singer, and we are told many times how charming he was. He could charm the birds out the trees. He could have any girl he wanted. He was a one-man baby boom. And basically, Shirley was the one that got away. Shirley was the girl he wanted that he never got, and he disappeared. He sailed off into the distance and disappeared. And so he's come back for Shirley, and that's what Desmond said. He's come for your mother after all these years. And what I like about this is there's a sort of grim inevitability to it. Like, nothing can be done to stop this force of nature.
He's like, this is our last 22 hours together. Let's
this will be our last meal as a family.
And I love that Desmond is genuinely perturbed by this. Like, there is this supernatural force that is coming for him.
Yeah.
And I think it's nicely offset that Shirley never seems to care at all. She's kind of laughing it off the whole time. Whereas Desmond and Beverly are like building it up to this huge thing.
Because Shirley's a grown-up with agency.
Yeah. She's a grown woman who's not going to suddenly get whisked off her feet by an old man.
Yeah. There's only one thing that can be done about this. Because the supernatural inevitability of Calypso taking Shirley away, the only thing that can be done to counteract that is for Desmond to write a love song.
Yes. Yeah.
Now.
Because that's what Calypso does. He woos women with his songs. And look, Desmond is a musician.
Yeah, Desmond's a musician. Music's a big part of the show. Can we take a little tangent here and talk about the theme tune?
Yes.
So the theme tune is Norman Beaton singing "Don't Scratch My Stoker."
Lyrics by Trix Worrell of that Sitcom. A very John Sullivan-esque the theme tune.
Yeah.
But I love the theme tune here. Not just because it's cool, I enjoy it, but it sums everything up. Let's look at the whole theme and the visuals as well. But the song itself, what he says, "Don't scratch my soaker."
From the long hot nights with an ocean breeze to the damp and to the rain of London City, we come from the sun to live in the cold. I miss me rum, I want my coconut tree.
They managed to rhyme London City with coconut tree. I think that's fantastic.
That's very good, yeah. Good work.
Pulled that off.
And it worked.
But basically, he's saying, look, I grew up in the tropics and now I live in Britain and it's raining all the time. Isn't that shit? Right?
Yeah.
So those are the lyrics. But and the sort of refrain is "Don't scratch my soaker." So soaker is a form of music. It's this music, the theme music. It's a form of calypso. And they're saying, "Don't scratch my soaker." There's scratching over it, the kind of late 80s DJ scratching over it, and it just sums up beautifully that generational difference. Sean, Desmond's son, is always he's like making music. He's creating,
he's a rapper,
scratching on the decks and all that, and it's just summed up there in one line: "Don't scratch my soaker." And I think that's a really nice little metaphorical thing.
Yeah, I agree.
And then the visuals of our opening credits, it's sort of, it's Peckham. It's 1989 Peckham.
Does it change slightly in the later series? I think there's a bit of an update on the later series.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, just very. It's the same theory.
It's the same
it's
vibe.
Just updated a little bit, but it's a bit on the nose. Like we see Peckham, we see some footage of Windrush coming in. We'll talk about that in a second. But literally the Windrush generation, and then it's like a white hand and a black hand shaking and and being friends. Yeah. It's a little bit on the nose, but it was the 80s, so I guess you got to kind of hit hard.
Anyway, so sorry for the tangent. The point I was trying to make is music is a big part of the series. Music is a big part of Desmond's life. And so this is great. We're going to actually get to see him write a song. This is brilliant, getting back to his roots and what he does best. How does that go, Alan?
Oh my God, this is not just the best part of this episode. This might be my favourite bit in the entire show. Where Desmond sings the 2 lines he's written. And obviously I'll drop it in here as a clip. But it's basically
It's a call and response, isn't it? Like, for the studio audience and for the people in the shop, he leaves it hanging.
Shirley, Shirley, you my girlie. Your teeth are white and your hair is...
The first line gets a huge laugh, and then the follow-up line, he doesn't even finish it. There's actual impromptu audience interaction, and I love the fact that they kind of keep that in, they embrace it, and it's so perfectly performed by Norman Beaton. It's just
It is.
It's you have to sort of see it as well as hear it, I think, but...
Because he knows how bad it is, and he knows he's got no chance against this supernatural singer.
It's so beautiful. And coming straight out of that, there is another hard edit where they've obviously had to stop. Everyone's had to calm down a little bit. I think they've just had to settle so they could get going again. You can tell. Yeah. But it's just such a beautiful moment, and just such a great encapsulation of Norman Beaton's acting as well.
Yeah, it's wonderful. But then, whilst we're on the subject of music, after Desmond's effort, Sean does one of his rap-ins.
Which is pretty good, actually.
He gets Lee to join in with a bit of beatbox. Everybody loves a bit of beatbox.
Lee, give me a box, man. Some filled with laughter and some filled with tears. Surely after all we've been through, I'd just like to say that I still love you.
It is a nice little bit of impromptu rap.
It is.
Yeah, it shows the difference. It shows that this is the younger generation.
This is the new music, Dad.
Yeah.
And then Matthew takes a turn, doesn't he? Matthew does a sort of camp little... I don't know if it's supposed to be an African dance. I don't know what he's doing. But he's very camp, Matthew. Very campy.
Yes. The point of Matthew's character, and so Jebo Asante is, as we say, Ghanaian, but the point was to contrast the difference between African culture and West Indian culture. That was Trix Worrell's idea of putting an African character in this. And the point is, the black people in Britain are not an amorphous blob. They come from totally different cultures. You would get kind of packed up in this Caribbean community. You would get Caribbean culture. It's like the food in Guyana is totally different to the food in Jamaica. Like I said, I was talking to a friend of mine who is of Guyanese heritage. She said to me, "It's like if you went to Australia as a Dutch person and they were like, oh, we're having a European party. Here's some fish and chips." It's like that's what it's as little sense as that. The idea of making the Guyanese is that the representation of Black Britain was Jamaica.
Yes.
Pretty much. And so they wanted it to be a bit different. And it meant you could get Norman Beaton, Carmen Monroe, because they are Guyanese, and it was all kind of very natural like that. So yeah, what's the background on Guyana?
Well, the first thing that's unusual about Guyana, if you don't know where it is it's not in the Caribbean. It's not an island. It's on the mainland of South America. It's right next to Venezuela. Mm-hmm. But because it was a British colony rather than a Spanish or a Dutch colony like most of the other surrounding areas, it's sort of culturally part of the West Indies. And so, like, when I say culturally part of the West Indies, what do you think of when I say West Indies? You think of cricket. So there are lots of, Guyana is part of the West Indies cricket team. There are lots of Guyanese cricketers who played for the West Indies. So, when Europeans arrived, like most of South America, it was a deserted wasteland before we got there to civilize it. But not true. Not true. That was a joke. You're supposed to laugh at that. I read there are 9 distinct tribes that lived in the area. And there's still quite a large population of Guyana who are what they call Amerindians, people of that native descent. Originally, the Dutch colonized there, and it was the euphemism that I read on Wikipedia was plantation agriculture, which is exactly what you think it is. It means tobacco, it means cotton, it means slaves. And so first the Dutch, and then the British later brought lots of people, enslaved people from Africa to work there. The British actually took over from the Dutch just after the Napoleonic era. So 1814, it became a British colony. And that's why there's a slightly different ethnic makeup in Guyana to some of the other Caribbean areas. Because Britain bravely outlawed slavery in the 1830s, just 200 short years after they basically started it. The slave trade became illegal in the British Empire. And so what they did was they brought over people from other parts of the area. Indentured workers were what they called them, which was not quite slavery, but doesn't sound like it was a great life. But they brought people from India, from southern India, to Guyana to work in those plantations. And so in Guyana now, there's a huge population of people of Indian heritage. And again, most of what I know about the West Indies comes through cricket. So if you've heard of players like Shivnarine Chanderpaul, Alvin Kalicharan, Rohan Kanhai, they're all West Indies captains who were Guyanese, who were of Indian heritage. So then if you bring it forward to that Windrush generation, so after the Second World War, people came across from the West Indies to work here. And it's interesting when we talk about immigration. Legally speaking, they weren't immigrants. They were migrants. They were British people who lived in the West Indies who came to be British people who lived in Britain.
Yeah.
And that only changed afterwards when the powers that be didn't like that. And so I read that it says in June 1950, after that immigration started, or that migration started, there was a cabinet committee was established to find, quotes, ways which might be adopted to check the immigration into this country of coloured people from British colonial territories, unquote. So there was very much this idea that these were British people, they were perfectly free to come and work here and live here, but the establishment didn't want that. And so the rules changed. But that initial Windrush generation, they faced a lot of prejudice. But as I say, legally speaking, they were British citizens. There was no way to say to send them home because they were home.
Yeah. And Desmond's is, as we've talked about before, is the way of kind of dealing with that without hitting it in the face, without going, hey, this is black people and we're going to be represented. It's just like, these are people, and in this case they're black, and this is their cultural thing. Yeah. I think it's difficult to overstate just how important Desmond's was culturally and the impact it had on white people who were seeing black people on television and sort of seeing them as like, oh, these are just like me. And that was always the point. I think that was the point of it.
That was Trix Worrell's point, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Shall we go back to our episode? There's a nice tangent there. We now have this, what feels like a sort of interstitial scene in Gloria's room. So Gloria's the...
Bit of a subplot.
The daughter. Yeah, so she's wearing a very skimpy dress. Do you like my dress, Mum? And she says, I'd like it if there was twice as much of it. Good line. If I can point out a nice bit of framing there, we have a nice shot where we've got Shirley talking to Gloria, and we see Gloria in the mirror, so we can sort of see them talking to each other, but they look almost side by side, which is... I quite enjoyed that. I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah. And this is an interesting subplot. It's basically two scenes. This is the climax of that. There's an earlier scene where Gloria is talking with her friend, and they're looking at the dress.
Yeah.
Quick aside, do you know the friend there? She's in the first sort of 4 series she played.
I do know her. I know her very well. She was in The Bill for ages.
Yeah. That's exactly, I was like, where do I know her from? Looked it up, like, oh, she was PC Polly Page in The Bill. Yes,
exactly.
Was in The Bill for 15 years. Whenever
we look at a sitcom, you're like, who's that person? You look on IMDb, and everybody's been in an episode of The Bill. But that's not what we're talking about here. She was main cast.
She was a regular.
Yeah.
And so we kind of set that up, and then this is the climax of it. So it's a real sort of simple, basic subplot. One thing I think is quite good, Trix Worrell does a lot, is the subplot will at least thematically tie in with the main plot, and usually in a fairly blunt way, like I said. And in this case, it's pretty much just Shirley going, look, I was a young woman once. I've been tempted by the calypso singer, and and so I know what she's saying. Like, I know what it's like to be young, to be sexy, to want to embrace that. But let's just be careful, okay? Which I think is probably something that is a bit more 1992 than 2024. You know, I don't want to see any slut shaming from Shirley here, which it doesn't quite go that far.
No, but I think
she is saying like, don't dress like that because men will try and take advantage of you. Basically, is what she's saying.
She does. What does that dress say to all the men you pass in the street? We talked a little bit about the younger kids, Gloria and Sean. Is there anything to say about the actors? They don't seem to have done much else.
Not really. Not that I've found anything. Yeah, they're just young, not child actors exactly, but teenage actors. I really like Kim Walker, who plays Gloria. I think she's great. I think she has great energy. I think she's a good actor. And the only thing I found of her, like, there's not much else in credits. I found an interview she did just a few years ago, so she's obviously much older, but she still has that energy. She still has a real kind of powerful presence. But she doesn't seem to be an actor. Justin Pickett, who plays Sean, again, sparse TV credits and worked in music promotion, and from what I understand is a music teacher now.
Okay.
Or kind of works in music rather than acting. Just while we're on it, let me just tie up a couple of the other actors. I want to talk about Dominic Keating.
That's Tony, the barber.
who plays Tony the barber, who's Tony's introduced in like episode 2 or something, where Michael, Desmond's son, wants to inject a sort of a younger, more hip stylist to the barber shop to draw in more custom, who notably is white. That is kind of it's not because of the nature of the show, they don't make a big deal of it, but the point is that he's of a different culture.
Yeah, when he appears in that episode, it's almost like he's a cuckoo in the nest. Michael's putting him in there, is his plant. But he very quickly fits in. He's like a local multicultural boy. And music is the key. Music, once again, Tony is into the same sort of music, the old school music, the old soca music that Desmond and Porkpie love. And so that's how he sort of blends into the group.
And again, for me, it's a little bit on the nose. It's like, our immediate assumption here is then challenged because actually he really knows about their culture. And it's a little bit kind of, hey, aren't we a great multicultural, everyone gets on well kind of vibe? But fair enough, right? That's the point we're making.
Can I point out something out about Tony? So his fashion choices are very 80s. He's perhaps the most 80s character in there. And there's one scene where he is wearing a La Vie Claire cycling top, which is based on that famous Mondrian coloured squares painting. That's a really niche reference. I'm into cycling. But is this Channel 4 cross-promotion? They were showing the Tour de France at the time. I reckon this is a bit of Channel 4 cross-promoting the Tour de France. Get Tony out there in the old La Vie Claire replica shirt.
What I really like about Tony is that they never develop his character in any way.
Yeah.
He in the last episode he's in is exactly the same as the first episode he's in.
Yeah.
And we don't get any backstory. In some of the later episodes, he starts to get a bit antsy about like, hey, stop pushing me around. I want a bit more power, and I want to be the assistant manager. And there's a whole episode where he kind of gets a bit full of himself and has to get slapped down. But that's about it, really.
He's replaced. So he's not in the last series, and he's sort of effectively replaced by a younger character called Ricky, who's a bit stupid. And there's a needlessly complicated backstory as we introduce Ricky in the first episode of Series 6. But what was that about? Did the actor move on? What was the story there?
Dominic Keating went off to Breck America. And so, they wrote out the character. And he did, actually. I mean, he was working in American TV and kind of getting the odd job. But his big break, which was obviously several years later, he plays one of the main roles in Star Trek Enterprise.
Oh, yeah. No, I've got it. I've got it in my head.
You just clicked,
yes.
I did the same. But Enterprise was like the one after I watched, so I never really watched it. I was like Deep Space Nine, Voyager.
Yeah, I'm not a Trekkie, but I've seen several episodes of that. I know exactly who you mean. Yes.
Yeah, and that was the one. That was the big role. That's the one that he's going to make a retirement doing.
That's
the
one that he's going to conventions for the rest of his life about.
But he's working. He's stayed in America and he's managed to make a living there. So fair play to him. And then you got Ricky, who comes in. He's the simple-minded northerner, that's the actor there is just he was a teenager, and he hasn't gone on to do like anything particularly interesting.
But he's almost like the family's pet in that last series.
It is weird that they kind of bring him in, and then there's quite a bit of backstory to introduce him, but then
it's needlessly complicated
really.
Backstory. Like there's a whole episode about Ricky's dad, and Desmond owes him a favour, and Shirley wants to know what favour it is that this guy. It's all nonsense. It don't really go anywhere. I didn't enjoy that episode much.
And then the character doesn't really do much either. I do feel like generally by Series 6, by the last series, it was it felt like it was just running out of steam, and it was still perfectly enjoyable. But it was like, okay, well, what more are we going to get out of this now? And the kids were growing up, and they'd kind of moved off, and so. I think it came to a kind of a natural end. It ended because Norman Beaton died. We'll talk about that in a bit, but
we'll get to that. Yeah. All right, shall we go back to our episode? Let's finish this episode off. So the last scene takes us back into the barber shop, and there's real anticipation building as Calypso's going to arrive. He's going to take Shirley away. That's what everybody believes is going to happen. So he comes in and he's a real charmer. I don't know. I didn't like this. Desmond's completely over the top. He sort of takes his flowers and his hat from Calypso and he throws them onto the ground very theatrically. It just feels a bit silly, It
is, but I think the show does go there occasionally. It's not too far out of line.
Yeah. But we get a nice visual punchline, which is he takes Calypso's coat and throws it to the ground, and we see that Calypso is wearing a dog collar. He's a man of the cloth.
I think it's a really good punchline. Actually, I think there's the comedic timing of it is really good. Like
it works well. He sort of does a little pirouette and spins around.
Yeah, and it just I think it's a great reveal to that. You feel the audience reveal. It's a real twist because we haven't had anything to set that up. It is very much a kind of like, oh, it's a punchline. It punches you. And one of the reasons I picked this episode for us to look at is I think it is just a real nice sitcom-y 24-minute
very
plot.
sitcom,
It's just a real nice plot, and the way the characters interact, perhaps because it is so talky, it showed all the characters off really nicely. So yeah, I liked it, and then so the conflict is resolved just like that in a very immediate moment, which is great.
So we can now everyone can relax. Everyone can relax and we can have a little bit of fun.
And so they just kind of go, oh, just for fun then, Calypso, give us the old magic. give us a turn. And he does, and always close with a song, Gareth. Always close with a song. And so he just really does like a 3-minute Calypso love song.
Yeah. And absolutely charms everybody. Charms Shirley, but there's no threat anymore because of Vicar. So Shirley has a little dance with him, and Desmond's pulling that sort of why I yada type of face. but there's no peril anymore. It's all just nice and fun.
You're the preacher's daughter, darling, we should find the altar. But before we do that, come we go round the back.
You know what I really liked about this, which sums up Desmond, the ethos behind Desmond's really well. Like I say, he's just dancing around and singing for 2 or 3 minutes. And then just one of the late shots, the camera angle's slightly different, and you can see that there's a bloke sat in the barber's chair watching, waiting for his haircut. And he's been there the whole time. Desmond was halfway through a cut.
Can I have a word as someone who is a proud holder of NVQ level 3 in retail standards? Can we talk about the levels of customer service at Desmond's barbershop? Because it's pretty bad. He gets really angry with people when they complain or when they say they don't want the haircut he's given them. He only does one haircut.
Yeah, he does the short back and sides. He just does the Desmond special.
It seems that he's quite bad at cutting hair. Like, everybody takes the mickey out how bad he is at cutting hair. But he makes up for that with his dreadful customer care. I do like how all the family have a go. So over the other side of the shop is where Shirley does the ladies' hairdressing.
Yeah.
And we see Gloria and Sean. There's an episode actually where Sean kind of takes over the shop and he's got his young friends coming in and he's shaving lines into their heads and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I do like how it is a proper family business.
Yeah, it is nice, and that is part of it, you know, Desmond's ornery customer service, and it is also the sort of central tenet between him and Michael, the elder son character. So can we talk about Michael?
Yeah, let's talk about Michael, because he's not in this episode, but he's a really important part of the dynamics of the family. So Michael's the older son, he's moved out, he's moved away, he's a bank manager, well, he's an assistant bank manager, which is a point of friction for him, because he wants to be a little bit more higher in the hierarchy. But he's got real pretensions, he's a bit of a yuppie. And I think this is really interesting about that second generation of migrants, you know. There's a conflict between Desmond and Michael. Michael's upwardly mobile. Desmond regards him as pretentious. But that conflict, whilst they can be a little bit abrasive, you know, it never gets out of hand, and it's sitcom conflict, you know.
Do you know what? It gets worse as it goes along. And, like, apart from Shirley, the mother, everyone in the family hates Michael. And it never felt justified to me. I'm like, why do they... Because he's a bit pompous and a bit arrogant.
He is very pompous, but nevertheless, he's trying to make something of himself.
Especially with Desmond. And I was always waiting for that moment where they sit down and, like, have a conversation. It's like, oh, you know what, they love each other really, it's respect. And I never get it. I never got it. I found that really fascinating. And I think it's very interesting to the central point of Desmond's, that upwardly mobile idea, making sure your kids have more than you had, more opportunities, more abilities, whatever. And they've done that, but then they don't like the result. Or rather, you know, Shirley loves him regardless. But Desmond doesn't like what his son has become. He's a pompous, arrogant dickhead.
He's a dickhead. That's a good word. He is a dickhead.
But like I say, it's never quite played hard enough for my taste. Like, and I think perhaps I associate with Michael more than anyone else. Perhaps that's why. not for his hard-working ambition, obviously, but you know, in terms of going off and doing your own thing. But it is that is like such a upwardly mobile thing. It's let me get ahead of you here, Gareth. It's Steptoe and Son.
Hey!
This is Steptoe and Son if Harold had actually got out and got a good job and moved away and just came back to visit every now and then.
And married that stripper.
Yeah, exactly. And the journey of Michael is very interesting. We set him up very early on as he's not just the son, but he comes in, he invests money into the business so they can kind of do it up a bit, but that means he is part owner. And so it's this conflict of the father-son relationship, but also he's like, well, no, we are, Dad, we are equals. I am an adult. We are business partners. You have to treat me as such. And he's like, no, you're just my son. You're an idiot. I hate you. Which is great. Actually, really good conflict.
Good conflict. Good sitcom conflict. I like it. I like the dynamic.
Yeah. Now, I want to contrast that with Porkpie, as in the sitcom Porkpie.
No, yeah. So Porkpie is the spin-off. I've only watched one episode of this. So tell us a bit more about Porkpie.
Yeah, you're saying spin-off. I'm saying sequel. Now that's a fairly minor difference, but Porkpie very much came after Desmond's, and it is a continuation rather than a side plot. Let's deal with the end of Desmond's first. Norman Beaton, who played Desmond, died in real life. That pretty much put an end to Desmond's. I suspect it was probably drawing to an end anyway. Would they have done another series? Maybe. But it felt like it had kind of done its time.
Well, the last episode of the last series is a Christmas special, and it's a weird episode, but it didn't feel like it wasn't like the last episode. Do you know what I mean? It didn't feel like we're wrapping everything up.
I'll tell you something really weird about it. In the sort of third act of that episode, which is an hour-long special, there's a whole scene where it's just been chopped to bits, and there's like they cut to Norman Beaton and he doesn't say anything. He just sort of like it's just some like obviously just some footage of him going yeah. It's like obviously just been spliced in. It's like Tony's mother in Sopranos, right? When they did that whole thing.
I remember.
It's really weird. It's very jarring. It doesn't work. And I thought, oh, he's not there. They've had to shoot this scene and he's not there for some reason. They've just sort of figured it out. But then there's another shot within that same scene where he is definitely there and he's with them and he's wearing the same clothes and all that sort of thing. So I cannot figure out what's happened there, but that has been chopped to bits for some reason. And it's some reason that they could not reshoot with Norman Beaton. Like, they couldn't just go, oh, let's just do a pickup here. There's also 2 episodes in Series 6 that Norman Beaton is not in. And it's written out that Desmond's off doing this and Desmond's off doing that. And it's kind of central to the plot. You know, the one is like they get another barber in and it creates conflict. So I don't think that was sort of rushed together last minute because he wasn't available.
What I want to ask is, how did he die? Was he ill or was it sudden? What happened?
Well, he had a heart attack. He was age 60, had a heart attack. But I'm starting to suspect maybe there was a bit of illness before that. Maybe he wasn't doing too well. Yeah. And the other sort of famous bit about the story of his death is he went back to Guyana to retire. Basically, he was 60 years old. He decided which is what makes me think maybe he knew he wasn't very well. Yeah. Goes back to Guyana, gets off the plane, meets the dignitaries because he's a huge star, and has a heart attack in the airport and dies.
Oh my God!
But dies in Guyana, and that's the story. Still, anyway, I mean,
day one of your retirement. Jesus Christ.
Oh. Yeah, but like I say, that's what makes me suspect he knew there was something wrong and that he was quite ill, and perhaps it was just like, I need to get back to Guyana because that's the dream, right? You go back to Guyana. Mm-hmm. I don't quite know what the full story with that is, and I've heard a few people talking about it with no more detail than that. So I don't think there's a hidden story there particularly, but he's definitely missing from a couple of episodes of the 6th series, and you don't do that unless you have to. You don't cut out Desmond unless there's some very good reason.
So bring it back to Porkpie then, the sequel, as you're calling it.
Yes.
So the setup for this is that Porkpie, has he won the lottery?
Yes. So the opening episode is Porkpie is the lollipop man, as he is, and we see him go to Desmond's barbershop, which is now closed, and he's talking to Desmond in as many things, and he says like, oh, ever since you died, things have never been the same.
So Desmond has died.
The little bit backstory we get is Desmond died and Shirley's gone back to Guyana.
Oh, come on. That is not what Shirley would have done.
Well, there you go. So that's it, and the kids are still here. But then, episode 1, Porkpie wins the lottery, £10 million, and this is 95. The lottery was just started, like was big. That was a big thing. So it was like winning the pools. So he wins £10 million on the lottery, and the next 11 episodes are about him dealing with the nonsense that comes with that. And Michael is a main character in that show, and Mandy is a main character in that show. So we haven't mentioned Mandy yet, but Michael, as we know, in the Desmonds, is an assistant bank manager. He does later become the bank manager.
Mandy is his secretary, assistant, not sure what you call it now.
She's his secretary/PA, I think both the terms are used.
And there's basically the joke throughout Desmond's is that she really fancies him and he doesn't notice. But then in the last series they finally get together. I'm curious if they always had the plan for them to get together, or if that evolves. Because what I'm going to say is that early on, I didn't like the character. I didn't think it was a very good performance. I didn't like the actor. But I think she got better. And I was wondering if, she was just cast as this small part and got lucky. Yeah, did a good job and kept getting asked back and so on. But I didn't like her performances early on.
I don't think that was the idea first off. But I think they knew they were going to have this secretary character, so they got someone in, it wasn't just a one-off thing. And then it was really a slow drip, this building up between them.
Very slow, yeah.
They probably made that decision at some point, but I don't know if it was part of the original plan. The actor, actually, is Matilda Thorpe, who plays Mandy, who I don't particularly know from anything else. But I will say, here's a little sitcom connection. Her sister is Harriet Thorpe.
British Empire?
British Empire, yeah. She's the woman on the secretary, I guess.
The one who's always crying. The
receptionist in, And you can see there's a resemblance, can't you?
Yeah, I can see that.
But yeah, so in Porkpie, Michael and Mandy are the other characters that come across from Desmond's. So Porkpie wins all this money and he goes to Michael, his, proxy nephew, and who is a bank manager, and says, "Hello, I need a bank account. I got £10 million."
Yeah.
And so Michael knows about the money and basically says, "You know what? You need a financial advisor. I'll do it for $100,000 a year."
So Michael's working for Porkpie.
Yes, but what I find really interesting about the Michael character in Porkpie is that it feels like we're getting everything that we're supposed to see him as in Desmond's, because in Porkpie he's a real prick. And he's like blackmailing and kind of conniving to get money out of Porkpie or to get his own way. He's really being quite unpleasant. And he's not that in Desmond's, but the way people talk about him makes it feel like he is. Yeah. And so that never sat right with me in Desmond. Suddenly in Porkpie, he's like, okay, this is what it is. Now, Porkpie was written by Trix Worrell, the same writer. So was that, he was finally kind of off the leash somehow, and he was like, right, I'm going to remake this character what I wanted him to be.
Yeah.
But perhaps with Desmond's, they had to be more tempered with it. I don't know. It's complete speculation. But there are new characters in Porkpie. We get Derek Griffiths as his kind of right-hand man.
Derek Griffiths plays his chauffeur, his kind of sidekick. Now, I mean, you can tell me more about Derek Griffiths in a minute, but I was born in 1975. Derek Griffiths was a children's television presenter when I was a kid. He presented a play school. He was the guy playing with the teddy bears. Like, that's how I know Derek Griffiths.
And I don't dislike Derek Griffiths, but he is children's television style acting. He's a bit broad for my taste.
He's very broad. Well, I think... Look, I only saw one episode of Porkpie. Incidentally, I found it really difficult to find. Where did you find it? If our listeners want to know.
I bought it off some bloke on the internet. And it's a VHS transfer. It's someone who's recorded it on the TV 30 years ago and has digitized it.
All right, so I guess our listeners can't really watch it. But I watched one episode and, bluntly, it wasn't a patch on Desmond's. It was much broader.
It is so much broader.
Quite problematic in ways that Desmond's isn't.
Well, the episode I sent you was particularly bad. I kind of sent you a bit because it was like, I wanted to show you the
the scene I'm thinking of is, Porkpie needs a maid. He needs a maid to look after the house and look after him and make his peas and rice. And so he is essentially auditioning maids. There's a recruitment process set up, which is him and Derek Griffiths in a room, and a series of women are brought in. Derek Griffiths makes sort of crude sexual gestures. Oh, I like this one.
Cartoonish ogling.
Cartoonish ogling, yeah. And then basically Porkpie rejects them for a series of, shall we say, visual reasons.
Yeah, he just goes, next. No, what he says is, can you make rice and peas? And I go, what? What's rice and peas? No, next. And like, okay, that's fine. That's a gag. Rice and peas is important to him.
Then a woman comes in who's a sort of slightly older, shall we say, slightly overweight woman, and just shouts, next.
Huge laugh from the audience, by the way, at that. And then a woman in a full-on burqa.
Full niqab. Woman comes in a full niqab. Next. Laugh. Oh my God, brought the house down.
The biggest laugh in the entire series, by the way, in that. Yeah. So definitely showing perhaps its age there, its time period. But I did want to highlight that because that was as bad as Porkpie got. But yeah, Porkpie is very broad, and I think it does suffer from some problems that Desmond's does not have at all.
Yeah, the contrast is favourable for Desmond, isn't it?
It's so broad, Porkpie. It's not as good. It's not as good by any means. There's some nice moments in it, but considering the conceit, it's a big concept that You've won the lottery. What next? And there's so much that can happen with that, and we don't really get it. It's not very interesting for a start, and it's not very funny. And the supporting characters are very broad. Michael and Mandy are regular characters. Mandy is sort of drawn in as a regular, and she's very broad as well. And there's a whole subplot with them. They're trying to get pregnant, and that's a whole thing that's going on at the same time. But yeah, it wasn't good. It wasn't good, but they got 2 series out of it, and so that's all right.
Well, I think we've kind of completed our episode. I've got one thing I wanted to talk about, which we've not covered, is the settings, the decor, if you like, the sets. Mm-hmm. What did you think of? Well, let's start with the barber shop. There's nothing particularly remarkable there, but I thought it was a lovely little. There's almost a timelessness to a barber's shop. You've got the towels and the gels and the potions and the things. Then you've got the house plants on Shirley's side. I think it was a really nicely dressed set.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? I hadn't thought about that, but that's 30-odd years ago. If I walked into that barbershop now, I wouldn't think, wow, this is old-fashioned. It's a barbershop.
The one thing I did notice is that the barber chairs were really old-looking. They looked like they were from the 60s.
Yeah.
And then I noticed that the chairs that Matthew and Porkpie are perennially sitting on, they also look really uncomfortable. I was like, they're sat there all day. Have you ever heard of this concept, hostile design? So like McDonald's and KFC, they design their seats so they're comfortable for about 10 minutes, but then you leave. They look like that, but it clearly doesn't work on Porkpie, who is going nowhere.
There is a bit of a running gag, though, that the chairs are crap and we need to update them. Desmond refused to spend the money and all that sort of stuff. So, they did kind of play on that.
But to bring it back to music, the pride of place above Desmond's workstation, above his mirror, is his trumpet. Desmond's trumpet sits up there on full display for everyone to see.
Yeah, he has his trumpet and he has a picture of his plot of land in Guyana where he's going to build his house.
Yeah. What about their living room? Did you notice their living room? It's like, we've talked about this before, a really well-designed set in a sitcom is 10 years old. So it didn't look 1980s, early 90s. It looked like something from the 70s, maybe early 80s. And that is spot on, because that is exactly what Desmond and Shirley's house would look like.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
The sort of flock lampshade that matches the wallpaper. Lots of glass ornaments.
I noticed that. The matching lampshade to wallpaper was good.
Lots of glass ornaments, gold photo frames. They had a sort of bookcase with glass shelves, which was very 1970s. Like, I remember those from when I was a kid. So, I thought that was a really nicely put together set. And the only other one I took note of was in this episode we see Gloria's room when we see Shirley criticising her skimpy dress. So Gloria's got 3 posters that I could identify. Can you name the 3 musical artists that I saw on those posters?
I remember seeing Sean's room, and I think there was a Michael Jackson poster in there. Yeah. So I don't know if that's the same.
No, I'll tell you, you've got your classic 3. You've got Seal.
Oh, great,
You've got Bob Marley.
Oh, right. Classic,
and you've got Miles Davis.
Oh, wow, that is eclectic, yeah.
Yeah, she's all over the place there.
But going back to our musical influences there, I guess that makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, so
it does. It totally does. One of the things that I enjoyed, and we like at the very start of this of our discussion, we talked about the accents, and I'm not going to do the accents. I'm avoiding the temptation to the accents. One of the things I enjoyed is that the kids, they speak in a South London accent until they get angry, and then they drop into that Guyanese accent. It comes out.
When they drop into it, it's not really Guyanese. That's more Jamaican, which is
it?
Yeah,
is it?
That's very much
more
the
South
influence of their surroundings rather than their parents.
That's interesting. Yeah,
I don't know if that was deliberate or if that's just what.
It reminds me of I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast before, but when I was in the army, I had a colour sergeant who drilled us as your Windsor Davis, if you will,
right, yeah.
And he was Scottish, and I found that for probably about 2.5 years afterwards, if I ever got angry and shouted, it came out in a Scottish accent. I tell you what, we haven't really talked about Trix Worrell in so much detail. We've mentioned him a lot, but can you give us a bit more background on him?
Yeah, I think Trix Worrell obviously is central to Desmond's the creator and writer. So Trix Worrell was actually born in St. Lucia, but came to Britain at age 5, I think, very young age anyway.
Yeah.
Little interviews and things I've read and heard with him. He seems to be one of those people who's like really driven, really motivated to be creative, and I was always wanted to be a storyteller in some kind of way. And he was only born in 1959, so relatively young. In the 80s, he was still in his 20s. And he went to film school, but then when he really started writing, he was mostly working in theatre. And without his knowledge, he was doing a play, and one of the actors put the play into a competition. It was a competition for debut writers. It was run by Channel 4, and it won. And he didn't even put himself in for it, But this was in 1984. So he won that, and Channel 4 turned that into a teleplay.
Okay.
And one of the stars of it, interestingly enough, was Mona Hammond.
Auntie Susu, who's later in EastEnders. Yes.
And she comes back in Porkpie as well, because she has a long-running thing with Porkpie. Okay. Interestingly, when she's introduced, she's Shirley's sister, so she's Guyanese. And later on, she becomes Jamaican. I don't know why that works, but she's...
Okay.
And Mona Hammond is from Jamaica, so they obviously just went with that, but I don't know quite how that works in the continuity of the story, but whatever. And then he was working in film, and he co-wrote at least with the director, a film called For Queen and Country.
Yeah, so you sent me, this is available on YouTube if any of our listeners want to watch it.
Yeah, and so he was really involved in that, and because he and the director had worked on it for a long time, it had been a real labour of love to get it commissioned. He was actually on set and involved with making it, which, the writer is not traditionally. But he was also kind of unofficially accent coach for Denzel Washington, who plays the lead and is supposed to be a South London kind of native.
Oh, God. Yeah, so, bless him, Denzel Washington's one of the best actors in the world. But, his accent's a little bit wavy, isn't it, in this film?
We must have been mad supporting that Poxy team.
You and Colin supported that bunch of wankers, I never did.
But you didn't mind us lot steaming in whilst you nipped in a few jewellery shops, did you?
Made a lot of money too.
So what you up to now then, or is that a silly question?
You know the Kuru, ducking and diving.
Yeah, fucking and skiving.
I haven't watched the whole thing, but I watched a few clips, not least because Jeff Francis is in it. Jeff Francis, who plays Michael, the elder son of the Ambrose family. And Jeff Francis, by the way, we talked about Michael there, we didn't really address him. Jeff Francis is, out of all the people in this show, has gone on to have one of the most fulfilling careers. He's very consistently worked for the last 30 years and still does. Just one of those faces you will see on TV all the time. I don't know if these connections with Trix Worrell help you get cast in Desmond's. I have no idea. It might just be coincidence, but there you go. That's his backstory. But that, like I say, he won that playwriting competition with Channel 4, and that really put him on their radar. And I think, like I say, we were talking about earlier at the time, Channel 4 particularly were looking for, who's the, hot, young, black voice that we're looking for. And I think Trix Worrell fell into that category. And he's this young, 20s enfant terrible of British black theatre and film. Yeah. So Charlie Hanson and Humphrey Barclay called him in for a meeting, said, we want you to pitch a sitcom. And the story he tells is he had no ideas. And as he was on the bus to go to the meeting and passed the barbershop and was like, the barbershop, not just a barbershop, but as a community centre and that kind of stuff. And that was the idea. He didn't even have an idea when he went to pitch it to the meeting. And anyway, but that's how it came about. He also wrote Porkpie, of course. And like I said, there was some other writers involved in both of these shows. Yeah. And this is something else which Trix Worrell seemed to be a big influence on this, but I think the general ethos for Desmond's, they made a real effort to get black people in crew as well. Help young black people getting into the industry and make sure that they were being represented there as well. That goes for crew, it goes for writing staff, it goes for the directing staff. And if you look at the other writers who are on Desmond's, a lot of them have not really any other credits. I think there was a real effort to give people opportunities, and some of them didn't go anywhere, right? At least in TV. Also, quite a lot of female names on that writing staff compared to other sitcoms of the time and probably still today. I think there was a very definite ethos of getting underrepresented people into the industry. Great. And that goes to Trix Worrell's career as a whole. He hasn't got much after Porkpie. There's not much in terms of TV. He's worked more in sort of film, but he's worked more as a producer. He said in the 90s that his company, they made music videos, and that's where they made all their money. And then they would use that to fund these low-budget films with first-time directors. And now he works in a kind of, I want to say, mentor kind of position. His focus seems to be getting young people, and particularly young people from underrepresented backgrounds, into the industry and helping them and teaching and that sort of thing. That seems to be where he's going, rather than creating his own work in quite the same way. Right. So Trix Worrell seems to live the life he preaches and is really out there still. which I think is really nice. I think that's a nice legacy of Desmond's, because very much Desmond's gave him a name recognition and gave him a step up in the industry, and it's still working to this day. I have one last little thing before we sign off. And it was a thing I noticed in one of the episodes, in that Sean, the younger son of the Ambrose family, he says, I'm going to be in bare trouble if we don't make this happen, right? I can't remember the exact word. But the use of the word bear to kind of intensify. Now, I don't know
That's interesting that it was that long ago. I'm familiar with it, but I thought it was quite a recent thing.
Well, down here in South London, that is very common. Like, oh yeah, I got bear money, man. Let's go out tonight. I got bear money. Right, stuff like that.
Are you doing that accent? You're comfortable with that accent?
That's the South London accent.
Right.
That's how the young people talk around here.
So that's interesting that it was in common parlance in the early 90s then.
Well, it jumped out at me for two reasons. First of all, I was like, ooh, I've only been aware of that word fairly recently, so I didn't realise it went that far back. I looked it up on the OED, and according to that, the use of bear as an intensifier, what they call it, traced back to 2003. That was their earliest usage.
So
that's
the earliest documented evidence that they've got.
So I did.
Wow.
I dropped them a line. I did.
Oh God, this is brilliant, Alan. Come on.
Yeah, they have a thing in the OED where they'll show the first known kind of use of it, and obviously that's the first documented use. It's usually in literature. So it's like, when you say Shakespeare invented 300 words, like he didn't. He's just the first record we have of him using.
It's the first time we wrote them down.
They have a form that you can fill in to say if you know of an earlier occurrence, tell us.
This is great.
So I've put it in, but I don't know what comes of that, and they kind of ask for the details, and they want to know the book. It's like, what's the bibliography? And I was like, well, it's a TV show.
It's great.
It's available here. I don't know if you can get it, whatever. So I've sent that in, and these things get researched. I don't know who looks at that, but who knows? One day, perhaps.
So by the time this episode goes out, we'll have another look at it, and if there's anything to link, we'll link to it.
I found that interesting, but the second reason I found it interesting was because in Desmond's, and I assume this is a very deliberate choice, there is not a use of slang, be that South London slang, be that West Indian slang, a little bit, the odd little word, but it really feels like this is kind of, we need to pitch this to an audience that is not part of this world, and so we don't want to kind of alienate them with slang or dialectical words particularly, especially the young kids. I can't speak for the West Indian culture, but I know what South London kids sound like now. I'm sure it wasn't that different in the 90s. And so that word jumped out at me, and here's the other thing. The way when it's in, I'll drop the clip in here.
I'm looking for it, man. Come on, man. Where they at? Wait. Hang on. Gloria, if you've lost them, I'm going to be in bad trouble, you know. What's wrong? Show me the tickets, man. What's wrong? Hey, Mum, she's lost it.
It's Sean and Gloria just sort of bickering with each other as they're coming into the room. So I think it might have been kind of improvised or not that strictly scripted, because it doesn't really matter what they're saying. I think it might be Justin Pickett, who was a 16-year-old lad from South London, just throwing it in there. So I don't know. Speculation.
This is great insight. This is what Britcom Pod's all about.
So yeah, that's everything I've got about Desmond, I think. We got anything else you want to add?
Filter and moustache. I mean, Adolf Hitler, Robert Mugabe, Richard Herring, Desmond Ambrose. They're the owners of the filter and moustache. But actually, I was thinking this early on. I was thinking, is anyone going to mention the fact he's got a Hitler moustache? And actually, they do.
Yeah.
I've written it down. Series 2, episode 12. Shirley says, him look like Adolf Hitler. Excellent. He does. It's absolutely right.
I thought it was funny because I immediately thought, ooh, Robert Mugabe moustache rather than Hitler moustache. And is that racist? I don't.
You massive racist.
But yeah, Desmond's. Let's sort of gather our thoughts. Really enjoyed it.
I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed spending time with the characters. I enjoyed spending time in the barber shop. I think it's a really friendly family sitcom, and that's the point. All the cultural stuff that we've discussed is absolutely relevant. But when all's said and done, it's just a nice family sitcom.
Yeah, I agree. I watched 71 episodes, which was a bit of a burden, I'll be honest with you. But it never kind of ground me down. And there's some real wildcard episodes in there, which are kind of wacky. But I think it gets away with it for the most part. And because it is largely grounded in reality, so these things sort of jump out. And like as I've sort of said earlier, we can't overstate just how important this was culturally. and how much of an impact it made on black British people and their perception from non-black British people and how they were seen.
Yeah.
And, we've talked about this before when we sort of try and talk about our background and how we're completely unqualified to talk about things. But, where we grew up, there weren't any black people. I was in a school of 1,000 people. There was 2 black kids in the whole school, and so I had no thoughts on black culture or black British culture, whatever that means. It just wasn't a thing, and so the only influence I have is TV, and so what you see on TV means something. And what I saw as a kid was Desmond's.
Well, if any of our listeners, depending on how old you are, you may or may not remember Desmond's, but it's all available on all 4. Every episode is there to go and watch. I would really recommend you just go and have a bit of a grab bag and watch 4 or 5 episodes from across the series. There's nothing so complicated that you can't just pick it up, and it's really nice. It's a really nice, enjoyable sitcom to spend some time with.
Really good one, Desmond's. Go and have a look at that one. It's worth a little revisit if you remember it from your childhood like me, and enjoy.
So if you've enjoyed listening to us talk about Desmond, please tell your friends. We're always looking for new listeners. You can find us on social media. We're on Twitter and Instagram at BritcomPod. And we're also on Facebook if you just search British Sitcom History Podcast.
Yep. Great, thank you very much. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, man.